prosecution, led by Colbert County District Attorney James Patton, says Hope offered state prison inmate Jesse Jett $1,500 to have Alabama Attorney General Charles Graddick killed. And Patton told the jury Hope followed up on those plans by placing $500 and a rifle in the trunk of a car at the Clanton Holiday Inn moments before his arrest June 3rd last year. The defense, the father and son team of Lawrence Sheffield Jr. and Lawrence Sheffield III, has said from the beginning of the trial the whole state case was a frame-up. Earlier today, Hope's wife Anise came to the witness stand saying she never heard Hope talk about wanting Graddick killed. Then in rapid succession, 3 character witnesses appeared, testifying that they knew Hope as a good citizen, with what Sheffield called a reputation for being peaceful. After that, the defense rested. In their closing arguments, Sheffield said there never was an assassin and there never was a crime, that the whole trial was caused by the Alabama Bureau of Investigation and what he called Graddick's insatiable hunger for publicity. Sheffield says, "I can't stand to see a law enforcement agency make a crime happen." Sheffield said if the ABI wanted to prevent an alleged murder plot, they could have gone to Hope at any time and stopped it. Instead, he said, Hope was used for political purposes. Patton spoke to the jury last before the judge instructed them on the law. Patton said Sheffield was asking the jury to disregard the law. Patton said politics don't have anything to do with this. Patton said Hope had hate spewing forth from him during tape-recorded conversations between Jett and Hope in State and Correctional Center last May. Patton said the facts are very simple. All I ask of you is to enforce the law. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News in the Elmore County Courthouse.
The defense rested their case early this afternoon. Closing arguments took 2 hours. The jury was gone 56 minutes before returning to say we find the defendant, Hubert Hope, guilty. It ended a trial that lasted 7 days concerning a plot that developed almost a year ago. And now Hubert Hope faces a possible sentence of 10 years to life in prison. The prosecution was led by Colbert County District Attorney James Patton, described in closing arguments by defense attorney Lawrence Sheffield as a hatchet man sent by Graddick to prosecute the case. Patton said in his closing arguments that was not true. Patton told the jury, "I prosecute. That's what I do for a living." After the guilty verdict was returned, Patton said he is satisfied, and said if people are allowed to get away with planning to kill prosecutors for doing their jobs, no one can be safe. Hope was said to want Graddick's death because of Graddick's involvement in the prosecutions of 2 of Hope's sons.
Yes, sir. I thought it was the correct finding under the law and all the evidence. We think our evidence was overwhelming, and apparently the jury agreed with us, and in that they went out and were back in 56 minutes.
Sheffield said in his closing arguments what he said from the start of the trial, that it was a frame-up by the Alabama Bureau of Investigation, engineered by Graddick for political publicity. After the decision, Sheffield said there will be an appeal.
I don't think that the jury looked through what happened in this case. That's what I tried to get them to do, and they didn't do it. I'm disappointed. I'm terribly disappointed.
Hope will be sentenced on Friday. He still faces charges that he solicited the murders of 2 other men involved in his son's prosecutions. Patton says the state will wait until sentence is passed on Hope before any decision is made about pursuing those charges. Tonight, Hope is being held without bond in the Elmore County Jail. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News at the Elmore County Courthouse.
She was on her car radio at first, and then she changed her walkie-talkie. She did the same thing. 112-1065. They talked with the security guard.
Well, apparently they thought, and we had no reason to doubt it either, that that was adequate at the time. We've had it for a number of years, and I think for the most part they've only had 1 security guard in the show itself.
What about looking to the future? What kind of precautions do you, as the director of the Civic Center, hope to?
Well, I'd like to put the National Guard around the outside, but I think we'd have to look at it realistically, and I'm sure that it will be beefed up on their part and possibly on our part. We're looking into this now and making a little study to see what arrangements can be made to do better, certainly in light of what has happened. It was not adequate, and we'll have to do something to enhance our security in every area.
Police still don't have many clues in their investigation of the robbery. So far, all they have is this composite drawing of one of the suspects, described as a white male, 28 to 35 years old. Police say the man, who has blonde hair and a mustache, was wearing a cowboy hat and coat. Officers say the second suspect, also a white male, was dressed similarly. The police and the FBI are checking every possible lead and say the robbers may have made their getaway in a rental truck. However, they are not positive. The thieves got away with 2 tons of valuable coins and precious metals, which some exhibitors estimate may have been worth as much as $5 million. The major question many people are asking is why only one security guard was on duty at the time of the holdup. Civic Center Director Charlie Kinsall says the coin show promoters themselves were responsible for providing security.
Apparently, they thought, and we had no reason to doubt it either, that that was adequate at the time. We've had it for a number of years, and I think for the most part they've only had one security guard in the show itself.
One exhibitor who asked not to be identified said he and other coin dealers are outraged that the Civic Center maintenance man would open the door to anyone in the middle of the night. However, Kinsall says because of the nature of operations at the Civic Center, which allowed deliveries and cleanup crews late in the evening, the maintenance employees' actions were not out of line. In any event, Kinsall says security will be tightened in the future. Dan Black, WSFA TV News.
The owner and operator of the Bethesda Home for Girls, Reverend Bob Wills, took the stand again today. Attorney Morris Dees tried to pin Wills down on his actions and the operations of the home. Wills, throughout the day, evaded questions, saying he couldn't remember dates or exactly what was said or done.
But Wills was exact when Dees asked him about alleged beatings that took place at the home. Wills told the court that he doesn't beat girls. He loves them, and he's tried to provide a place where girls can work out problems. Wills did say he paddled 2 girls that ran away from the home in the 2 years that he's been in charge of the facility. Wills' wife, Betty, took the witness stand this afternoon. Under a barrage of questions from Dees about alleged beatings at the home, she said, quote, "Yes, I have spanked girls, but I love the girls. They mean everything to me. I love Candy even though she's suing us. Mr. Dees, I love you, and I wish you were saved." With that, a chorus of amens rippled through the audience, and Mrs. Wills was dismissed from the stand. The SPLC will finish presenting their side of the case tomorrow. The hearing will break for a week before the defense will have its chance to put on evidence. Reporting from the Montgomery Federal Courthouse, Don Phelps, WSFA TV News. The owner and operator of the Bethesda home, Bob Wills, and his wife, Betty, were called to the witness stand today. The Wills testified they had spanked girls at the home, but denied they were beating the teenagers, as the SPLC lawyers have alleged. Under questioning from attorney Morris Dees, Mrs. Wills broke down and blurted out, quote, "I love these girls. They mean everything to me. I love Candy even though she's suing us. Mr. Dees, I love you, and I wished you were saved." That brought a chorus of amens from the audience, made up mostly of church supporters. Throughout much of the day, the Reverend Wills evaded questions by Dees by saying he couldn't recall exact dates or exact conversations he had with people involved in the case. Dees spent much of the time asking Wills about the strict rules of the house and why parents were allegedly denied contact with their daughters. Wills said it was a rule of the house that girls should not be visited by their parents during their stay. Lawyers for the SPLC will wrap up their case tomorrow, and a week from Wednesday, the defense will present its evidence. Reporting from the Montgomery Federal Courthouse, Don Phelps, WSFA TV News.
Siegelman says of the 23 proposed amendments, number 4, the co-employee liability law, was the most widely advertised. He says Alabama law requires that any group of people involved in raising or spending campaign funds for some type of political issue must file a financial statement. He says the state law is deficient because it was passed in 1915, before mass media's effect on political campaigns.
Today, under Alabama's laws, candidates and political committees do not have to file a report until after the election. And of course, it doesn't do the voters a whole lot of good to find out after an election that a particular amendment was supported or opposed by a particular special interest group. That's the kind of information that we as voters need before we vote, rather than after.
Siegelman says several legislators are trying to get a pre-election disclosure law passed, which would be used in the next election. He says he's in favor of a disclosure law similar to Florida's, where political committees must make financial statements public at least 3 times before the election. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News.
Today, under Alabama's laws, candidates and political committees do not have to file a report until after the election. And of course, it doesn't do the voters a whole lot of good to find out after an election that a particular amendment was supported or opposed by a particular special interest group. That's the kind of information that we as voters need before we vote rather than after.
Council President J.B. Peake called the meeting to order at 7:02 and announced that 6 of the members were having a meeting outside the council chambers, so he recessed the council meeting until they finished. But 10 minutes later, Councilman Raymond Major told the council that the 6 council members won't come back unless Peake resigns.
Me and the other 5 councils have so decided that we will no longer be on council as long as you hold that seat. The reason for that is that the court system has not worked, has not done its job, and we must bring this to a head. All we ask is that you remove yourself from council, and the 6 of us will then join council with a presiding officer, and then carry on city business as usual. If that does not take place, then there will not be any city business.
All 6 say that Peake was never legally elected president pro tem of the council. When Peake was up for election in 1981, he received only 5 votes. The 6 council members say it takes a majority of the council, or 6 votes, to be elected to the office. The problem was compounded when then-President Bill Porter resigned and Peake assumed the office of president. 8 months ago, the matter was taken to the Dallas County Circuit Court, but no ruling has been handed down. Peake says he won't resign.
I am not going to remove myself. Been in the hands of the courts for several months now. They have not resolved this problem. And until they do, I'm going to remain in this seat.
City Attorney Henry Pitts called for police assistance. Then he went to talk to the 6 council members. Pitts urged them to come to the meeting. He told them that the council would be unable to operate without them, but they refused. When he returned to the council chambers, he advised the 5 council members to adjourn the meeting. But Mayor Joe Smitherman asked that the council listen to a financial request from the Selma High School band. Afterwards, he suggested that the members recess the meeting until tomorrow in hopes of resolving their differences. The 5 then voted to recess until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. As soon as the council chambers cleared, the 6 members took their places in the council chamber and began their own council meeting. The 5 still say they'll have a meeting tomorrow morning, but the 6 say they won't be there. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News in Selma.
Good job there.
Well, you usually start them at a puppy and start them with usual game of sitting and staying and coming and, just make it a game for them, and then just continue to work with them as time goes along and, develop them and bring them on. About a year old, you really start putting a lot of work into them.
So at what age do you have an animal that's fully trained for retrieving?
Most of them are usually trained by about 8 months to 14 months. It's usually anywhere, well, up to 24 months, really, to get them into the advanced stages.
What's one of a good retriever worth?
That'd be hard to say. It varies, depends on the breed of the dog and the age and, just how long people have had him and just how far advanced he is. You can buy a puppy for $125 and dogs up to $3,000, $4,000, $5,000.
The suspects, 34-year-old Sherman Casey of Prattville, 44-year-old Jack Tice of Montgomery, 23-year-old Deborah Thomas of Dothan, 22-year-old Donald Sullivan of Dothan, and Cindy Casey of Prattville were arrested around midnight by Dothan police. Montgomery police developed information yesterday that a rent-a-truck which was allegedly used in the Civic Center robbery on Sunday was in the Dothan area. A Dothan police officer spotted the truck near a fast food restaurant, called for backup help, and made the arrest. A search of the Hertz truck on the scene of the arrest failed to turn up any of the stolen property, and officials had to wait until 8 o'clock in the morning for a search warrant to open up another truck allegedly rented by the subjects. When the lock was cut off, one chapter in the largest robbery in the history of Montgomery came to a close. Inside the truck, boxes of coins, cougarans, and bars of silver. In a news conference following the search, Montgomery Police Chief Charles Swindle had high praise for the work of the Dothan Police Department in apprehending the suspects. Swindle says the stolen goods will be kept in an undisclosed location in Montgomery until the merchandise can be returned to its owner.
According to police officials, all of the suspects are charged with traffic violations at this time, but later on today, they're expected to be formal charges of robbery and theft of property placed against them. From Dothan, Alabama, Don Phelps, WSFA TV News.
Since the robbery took place, Montgomery police working around the clock developed information that a rented truck allegedly used in the robbery was in the southeast area of the state. A lookout was posted for a Hertz truck with Oregon license plates. Dothan Police Chief Cater Williams says one of his officers, Sergeant Lewis Miller, spotted a truck at a fast food restaurant while on a stakeout.
One of the trucks pulled onto the circle and headed south, the other vehicle remaining in the parking area. We called for assistance at that time. Myself, Sergeant Kenny, and Sergeant Bob Sorrell stopped the vehicle that hit the circle approximately 150 yards south of the motel and made the arrest of the two occupants. The other officers which responded were responsible for the capture of the other individuals on the other truck.
Miller also says the driver of the truck tried to run an officer off the road and police fired shots at the truck's tires before it stopped. Arrested on the scene were 34-year-old Sherman Casey of Prattville, 22-year-old Donald Sullivan of Dothan, 44-year-old Jack Tice of Montgomery, 23-year-old Deborah Thomas of Dothan, and Cindy Casey of Prattville. A police search of the Hertz truck turned up only a handgun allegedly stolen from Mobile. Officers had to wait until after sunrise to search the other rented truck. It took several hours for police to complete the paperwork for the search warrant. But finally, the lock was cut, and the door to the rental truck was open, revealing dozens of boxes containing 4,000 pounds of coins, paper currency, bars of silver, and other precious metals. Montgomery Police Chief Charles Swindle praised the Dothan Police Department for their outstanding work in the investigation. Following the search of the truck, the suspects were escorted to Montgomery, where the long and tedious task of identifying the goods will begin.
The accusations against Hope became known after his arrest last spring. Testimony by prosecution witnesses during the week-long trial indicated Hope spoke many times to state prison inmate Jesse Jett during the month before his arrest about having Graddick and 3 other men killed. The prosecution said Hope was mad at the men because they were involved in prosecuting 2 of his sons for murder. And the prosecution said Hope followed up on his plans with Jett by placing a rifle and $500 in the trunk of a car that he thought belonged to a hitman at the Clanton Hotel June 3rd. In all, the prosecution presented 5.5 days of testimony and evidence, while the defense throughout the trial accused the Alabama Bureau of Investigation of framing an innocent man. Sergeant Ken Halford was one of the ABI agents who worked on the case.
We simply provided a stage where the defendant devised the idea as to what he wanted to occur.
Was this a case of entrapment?
No. We did not plant the seed. We did not plant the idea. That was his idea. We did not reach up in the sky and pull this down.
Yesterday, the defense said the whole state case was created because Graddick wants political publicity. Halford says it's not true. The ABI would have conducted the same investigation no matter whose life was threatened. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News.
Since the robbery took place, Montgomery police, working around the clock, developed information that a rented truck allegedly used in the robbery was in the southeast area of the state. A lookout was posted for a Hertz truck with Oregon license plates. Dothan Police Chief Cater Williams says one of his officers, Sergeant Lewis Miller, spotted a truck at a fast food restaurant while on a stakeout.
One of the trucks pulled onto the circle and headed south, the other vehicle remaining in the parking area. We called for assistance at that time. Myself, Sergeant Kenny, and Sergeant Bob Sorrell stopped. The vehicle had hit the circle approximately 150 yards south of the motel and made the arrest of the two occupants. The other officers which responded were responsible for the capture of the other individuals on the other truck.
Miller also says the driver of the truck tried to run an officer off the road, and police fired shots at the truck's tires before it stopped. Arrested on the scene were 34-year-old Sherman Casey of Prattville, 22-year-old Donald Sullivan of Dothan, 44-year-old Jack Tice of Montgomery, 23-year-old Deborah Thomas of Dothan, and Cindy Casey of Prattville. A police search of the Hertz truck turned up only a handgun allegedly stolen from Mobile. Officers had to wait until after sunrise to search the other rented truck. It took several hours for police to complete the paperwork for the search warrant. But finally, the lock was cut, and the door to the rental truck was opened, revealing dozens of boxes containing 4,000 pounds of coins, paper currency, bars of silver, and other precious metals. Montgomery Police Chief Charles Swindle praised the Dothan Police Department for their outstanding work in the investigation. Following the search of the truck, the suspects were escorted to Montgomery.
Now the tedious process of identifying all the stolen goods begins. Montgomery Police hope to return all the stolen merchandise to its rightful owners, and it will be kept in an undisclosed location until it is returned. Reporting from Dothan, Alabama, Don Phelps, WSFA TV News.
Four of the 5 robbers were taken to the Montgomery City Jail around noon. The 5th, Cindy Casey, is in a local hospital recovering from back surgery, which was re-injured in the attempted getaway. All have been charged with first-degree robbery and theft of property. Police allowed reporters to view the 40 boxes of stolen goods, which included gold and silver coins and bars, metals, jewelry, paper money, and stamps. At a news conference, police recapped the robbery. Officers say Saturday evening, Jack Tice rented a Hertz truck from Harold Baker's rental agency on the Atlanta Highway. Tice told Baker he needed the truck for 1 day to help a friend move from Montgomery to Prattville.
The composite was identified by some of the police officers as looking a lot like Casey. This led us to his neighborhood in Prattville. Sunday afternoon later, Jack Tice was stopped and interviewed in Prattville at the same address of Casey's. At that time, we didn't have Tice's name. Then we got a tip from an anonymous source that said that they were probably in the Dothan area.
Police spent about $5,000 investigating what's being called the largest robbery in the city and state. Police Chief Charles Swindle called the entire effort a masterpiece of police work.
The stolen goods will now be sorted out to determine if all the goods have been returned, and the owners will be allowed to reclaim the valuables. In the meantime, police are still investigating the robbery and say more arrests may be forthcoming. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News at the Civic Center.
The short blonde girl, identified only as Candy H., was the last but perhaps one of the most important witnesses to take the stand on behalf of the plaintiffs. She told the court of numerous occasions in which girls received licks. She said one of the girls in one particular instance was pregnant. She said when she first arrived at the school, she received a list of rules which stated that she would not be allowed to receive visitors for a period of 1 year. In addition, she said all mail was censored. In describing the living conditions, she said she and 7 other girls were forced to share one small room that had only 3 beds. She told the court that 5 of the 8 girls slept on the floor in sleeping bags. Regarding food, Candy said she was hungry much of the time and said all of the non-pregnant girls were made to fast on certain days. While testifying, the young girl broke into tears when asked to examine a letter that she sent to her mother while at Bethesda. She told the court that reading the letter made her feel like she was back there again, and that frightened her. She said once she got out of Bethesda, she felt, quote, like an alien, and is now having nightmares about not being able to leave the school. Bob Wills, who runs Bethesda, has denied any mistreatment of the girls. Yesterday, he testified that he told Candy that she was free to leave at any time, but she said today that he never offered to take her home. Candy says both Mr. and Mrs. Wills questioned her numerous times about what she intended to do with her baby, and she told them she would give it to the state for adoption. She said the reply to that was that if the child was given to the state, it would not go to a Christian home, but that if she, Candy, remained in Bethesda and had the baby would be placed in a Christian home. Federal Judge Byron Thompson, who is hearing the motion for the closing of the Bethesda school, plans to resume the hearing March 17th. At that time, the defendants in the case will present their side of the story. From the federal courthouse, Dan Black, WSFA TV News.
The spotlight was brightest when it focused on the bear, and there were plenty of folks who could have stolen that attention. People like comedian Bob Hope.
One of the truly great legends of football, whose career goes back to BC, before Cosell.
And people like Billy Graham, members of Alabama's congressional delegation, and 1,000 more. The victory dinner was in part started by Senator Jeremiah Denton, who said he felt like it was time the Bear get a national recognition dinner. Most of those who were there were former players and coaches who worked under Bryant at some time in his career, including Jackie Sherrill of Texas A&M, Jerry Claiborne of Kentucky, Danny Ford of Clemson, and Pat Dye of Auburn, the man he beat for his record win. 5 of the 45 assistant coaches or players who've since gone on to their own successful coaching careers, all heaping praise after praise on the Bear.
Said earlier, I'm tired of hearing that Paul Bryant, I'm tired of hearing 315. But I'm mighty glad it's behind us, and I'm mighty glad it happened against dear old Auburn. And I love Auburn, and I love Pat. I'm not glad it happened against Pat, but Pat he'll have plenty of chances to get even.
And while many were joyously reflecting on the past victories,
Coach, we are interested in the future, not in the past.
Utterances of the Bears retiring was something that never crossed a single lip. All of the people were there to encourage him on in his unique career. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News in Washington.
Here, Mr. Hilbert, Morgan Pierce, seventh place defense, Olsen, Hilbert. Eighth place, Colton Kent, 13.
But the greatest thing all about Coach Bryant, and this is a night for him, is that the things that he's done for people that nobody knows anything about. And there's a lot of you out there tonight, including myself, that Coach Bryant has done so much for that nobody has any earthly idea about. And you know, there's even people that he's done things for, and they don't even know it.
During last night's meeting, 6 of the council's 11 members refused to come to the meeting. The 6 say they won't return until the current president, J.B. Peake, resigns. Last year, Peake was elected council president pro tem on a 5-4 vote, but the 6 say he obtained the post illegally because it takes a majority of the council, or 6 votes, to be elected to the position. The problem became more complicated when then-President Bill Porter resigned and Peake assumed the office of president. The council filed for a court decision on the issue in July of last year, but the suit hasn't been scheduled. After an hour of talking back and forth, the 5 council members decided to recess until this morning at 9 o'clock. But as soon as the council chamber was cleared, the 6 council members took their places and held their own council meeting. During that meeting, the 6 appropriated $3,100 for 2 hospital warning signs and $2,000 for the Selma High School band's trip to the World's Fair in Knoxville, Tennessee. But City Attorney Henry Pitts says the second council meeting is null and void. He says the council can't take any legal action against the 6 at this point, but says a resident that lives in any one of the 6 council members' wards could take legal action. Pitt says if there's not a quorum by the March 22nd meeting, he'll go to the circuit court and ask the judge to give Mayor Joe Smitherman more authority to conduct city business until the matter is resolved. In the meantime, the 5 council members tried to meet again this morning, but like last night, there wasn't a quorum. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News.
We're up here to conduct business with the city, and I'll step down, and I think it's a very serious matter.
Heard that argument. The alternative to that is we go to a person that we're convinced is serious, and we tell him, we know what you have said, we know what you're conspiring to do, please don't do it. And he says, okay, I won't do it, and I appreciate you coming and telling me. And then he waits 6 months, 18 months, 2 years, and he does it again. He's successful that time. Now, have we done what we should do?
City Councilman Donald Watkins asked the board to address 5 problems. Watkins asked why old refrigerators aren't repaired or replaced, if the board has ever had an energy audit, and determined why some tenants' bills have increased so dramatically. He also asked about the procedure on painting the housing units and cutting the grass, and if 1 or 2 parking spaces can be provided for each household. Housing Authority Director J.C. Miller says there are no new refrigerators in stock. He says the authority just doesn't have any funds to repair or replace all the refrigerators. Board member Jerry Kaiser says he and others have been trying to convince the Office of Housing and Urban Development that many of the housing projects need painting both inside and out, but he says all efforts for funding of both have failed. Kaiser says one of the reasons the authority doesn't have the money to correct some of these problems is because so much money is required to correct the acts of vandals. Watkins suggested that the board pursue fundraising efforts to offset federal funding cuts. Board member John Knight says the city can also help by returning some $90,000 the authority must pay the city each year in lieu of taxes. Watkins then suggested that some of the board members attend the city's annual budget sessions and ask for the money they need. Councilman Mark Gilmore then asked the board to decrease the residents' maintenance charges, inform the tenants of what goes on in board meetings, and demand that all housing personnel be courteous to the residents. State Representative Alvin Holmes echoed Watkins and Gilmore's requests and also asked the board to be more lenient in evicting delinquent residents. He says most of the tenants are black and need more consideration because black unemployment in Alabama is 30%. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News.
Watkins' plan for controlling guns in the city is in 3 parts. The first and second parts would ban handguns and an assortment of what Watkins calls deadly weapons, and at the same time forbid the sale of handguns within the city. The third portion of Watkins' plan calls for the council to pass a resolution asking the state legislature to establish stiff penalties for crimes in which handguns are used. Watkins says his plan is patterned after a gun control ordinance recently enacted in Morton Grove, Illinois, with a few revisions of that plan. And just as that plan met opposition in Illinois, Watkins says he has already been contacted by people who are against his plan. But he says he's also received calls from people who support his ideas about gun control. There were people standing in the aisles at the council meeting. Many made it clear they were there to try to stop Watkins' proposals. But after the proposals were read at length in the meeting, Watkins requested that the council not act on the first 2 proposals for 2 weeks. Council Chairman Willie Peake followed that request by officially declaring a public hearing on the proposals for the same meeting on March 23rd. Many of the people in the crowd were angry over the delay, but after the meeting was over, Watkins defended his proposal, saying, "I think I have an obligation to try to reduce crime in the city." Watkins thinks handguns are a major contributor to the number of violent crimes. Watkins said he still thinks a lot of people have a frontier mentality, that they think they have to arm themselves for protection. Watkins says Montgomery has a fine police force and people don't need to be walking around with guns. Watkins says he has been considering making the proposals for some time, but the shooting death of a Montgomery police officer convinced him it was time to act. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News.
The Washington, D.C. hotel was filled with friends like Bob Hope, 1,000 fans, and enemies, if you can call them that, like Auburn graduate Governor Fob James and Auburn coach Pat Dye. All were there to pay tribute to Bryant, who marked history with his 315th college coaching win on November 28th with a 28-17 win over the Tigers of Auburn. For Bryant, the night provided more publicity that he traditionally tries to shun, but for this night he seemed to be enjoying the attention, even though an ample dose of humble found its way through.
And I want to say one more time, and get tired of saying this, that I've lost a lot more games than I've won. Players win games.
Despite his modesty, the turnout at the $125 a plate dinner spoke for itself, and so did the phone call from President Reagan. And as for the Bear calling it quits,
I'm not glad it happened against Pat. But Pat will get the 11 and a chance to get even.
Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News in Washington.
What the subpoena requests is all of the travel vouchers and expenses from the Finance Department and also from the Public Service Commission concerning Hezekiah Wagstaff and Washington Booker.
More about the convention in and of itself. The convention was divided into a series of workshops as well as some lunches. Yes, sir. And further explaining that this matter will be set for hearing on Monday. And of course, at that time, Mr. DuBois continued to persist in his very unprofessional mode of casting racism and disrespect to one of the co-employees of mine who employed with Billy Joe Camp office. That person happens to be a black young lady. At her attempt to follow the commission's orders and provide Mr. DuBois with a copy of that letter, Mr. DuBois used a great deal of flagrant words in her presence.
They've been employed there within the statute of limitations, which is 3 years. Of course, they've only been there a year, as I understand it. But in any event, that's the grand jury in Montgomery County has a continuing interest in the operation of the Public Service Commission. As you know, the grand jury spent almost a year on the Public Service Commission recently. After all, they are public employees. They are spending public money at public expense, and the matter has received widespread media attention since the initial broadcast of WSFA TV, and we've had several complaints in the office. In fact, we had a complaint on it prior to the broadcast, so our office is going to treat it just like any other case. There's no special emphasis on this matter because they're Public Service Commission employees, but after all, they are public employees and they do work for the public.
The state of Alabama should be advised of the posture of the operation within this commission. At the time we filed those grievances, President of this commission, Billy Joe Camp, initiated a letter to Mr. DuBois explaining that we were in receipt of, the commission were in receipt of those complaints, and further explaining that this matter would be set for hearing on Monday. And of course, at that time, Mr. DuBois continued to persist in his very unprofessional mode of casting racism and disrespect to one of the co-employees of mine who were employed with Billy Joe Camp office. That person happens to be a black young lady.
I did not know Miss Bell was offended until he came in here this morning. And if Miss Bell was offended, I definitely apologize, because I think the world of her. She's an excellent employee.
That you have serious problems working with blacks.
Not so whatsoever. I spent last Friday morning, 3/4 of the day Friday, working with Miss Yvette Smiley Smith to acquire 5,000 more additional feet of space.
It was much easier to move for social reform in the 50s and in the 60s when we had a booming economy, when we were really a people of plenty. It's a lot harder to move for social reform in the late 70s and the 1980s when we have gone from bad recession to worse recession and have been teetering on the brink of a depression. Because social reform eventually costs money, and the question is, where does the money come from? And
the black leader's major concern is the high unemployment rate among blacks statewide. Representative Alvin Holmes offered 3 possible solutions for community involvement to slow down the jobless rate. One calls for businesses to implement a fair employment practice by hiring 1/3 blacks for jobs. Holmes says he knows of 4 businesses that systematically discriminate against black in employment. He wouldn't name the firms because he says lawsuits are forthcoming. The second solution is for businesses to put 1/3 of the revenue back in the black community, and number 3 calls for firms to set up a job referral placement center. Black leaders say many blacks want to work but can't find jobs. Chamber leaders have promised to present the group's concerns at their next meeting, and officials remind the black leaders businesses can't hire people if no jobs are available. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News. Black leaders say they know about the sluggish economy and that a number of businesses don't have any job openings. But black leaders point out blacks lead the nation and state in unemployment statistics. Leaders say they want blacks to get a piece of the job employment pie. Representative Alvin Holmes called on chamber officials to share with the local businesses 3 possible solutions. One is to establish a job placement referral bank. 2, place 1/3 of local business revenue back in the black community. And 3, implement a fair employment practice by hiring 1/3 black workers. The solutions were endorsed by church leaders, the National Urban League, and the Montgomery Improvement Association. But chamber representatives say businesses can't hire people if jobs aren't available. However, they promised to put today's informal discussion at the top of the chamber's agenda at its next meeting. There was some good news at today's meeting. Chamber officials say several firms, including General Electric, Maxwell and Gunter Air Force Bases, and the State Highway Department, are slated to begin construction on projects this year and in 1983. Those new businesses are expected to employ several thousand people. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News.
Mondale says there's no higher calling in America than the teaching profession. He says for every dollar spent on education, there's a return of $6 to the gross national product. And for every $4 spent through high school, there's a return of $7 on the federal, state, and local level. Mondale says education enriches cultures, prepares people to be good citizens, and aids the nation's economy. But he says recent public attitudes and federal budget cuts aren't giving the educational profession the respect and support it deserves.
The national salaries paid to classroom teachers last year was lower than the entry-level salary paid to engineers and those beginning careers in computer sciences, mathematics, and statistics. Secondly, we must establish scholarship programs, as the Carnegie Commission has proposed, to draw the best students into teaching. Third, we must improve teaching preparation with tougher standards and with more resources.
Mondale says outstanding teachers should be rewarded. The problem of violence in the schools should be solved, and something should be done about all the paperwork teachers must complete. After Mondale's speech, former Governor George Wallace addressed the group despite a case of laryngitis. Wallace told the teachers that he's not sure if he'll run for office, but says he's still considering it.
No governor in the history of this state has ever tried to contribute more to education in Alabama than I have, and if I were to be the governor again, I would do it all over again, just like I've done it in the past.
The third scheduled speaker, former Attorney General Bill Baxley, was unable to attend because he was tied up in federal court. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News in Birmingham.
Any unjustified.
We feel that some of this idea of pre-teaching the test comes from the fact that standardized tests are hard to take, especially if you've never taken one at all before. And teachers are teaching test-taking techniques, how to read the question, double in on the answer sheet, and teachers are reviewing the general subject matter that's on the test, but there's no way that teachers have access to the actual test before the test day.
Let's look for it.
You've got to draw the better calves in the herd, and then you've got to be able to use them.
Are many of those good guys here for this this event?
Yes, sir. I imagine most everybody that was at Houston will be here.
So it's going to be a tough competition for you.
Oh, yes, sir.
Can you make a living at this?
Yeah, if you rope good enough and draw good enough, you can.
Of the what do they have? 15 tonight? 15 contestants?
There'll be, yes, sir. There'll be 15 during the rodeo, and then they'll have probably about 20 after.
How many you say will get the rope on their calves?
Oh, I imagine 90% of them.
Mondale says in the past 20 years, the National Education Association has achieved tremendous progress. He noted Title I education for the disadvantaged, college student assistance, Head Start, and bilingual education. He says now these programs are in jeopardy because of the Reagan budget cuts.
3 million children have been forced out of the school lunch program. Title I, which is working now. We've got evidence that that program is producing. It may be the best news in America today that we finally learned how to help poor children learn and achieve and get on their own feet. It's the best news of all. They single out Title I program by a cut of 50% by 1984.
Mondale says student loans for moderate and middle income students will be eliminated, as well as graduate and professional student assistance.
And it's no wonder that just this past week, not just Democrats and former vice presidents, but 21 freshman Republican congressmen formed a coalition that they called a coalition against reductions in education and made an open break with the president of their own party on this issue.
Mondale says only 6% of the country will benefit from Reagan's plans. He says those persons are in high-income brackets. Mondale says the remaining 94% of moderate, middle, and lower-income people will suffer. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News in Birmingham.
I am particularly honored
Testing or a review by citizens you select. We will be happy.
We want to make sure that the achievements of the youngsters in Jefferson County are realized as achievements. So there should be no question in the mind of any parent in Jefferson County that achievements that their child or children achieve are in fact that. That's our interest with regard to Jefferson County.
Alabama should be advised of the posture of the operation within this commission. At the time we filed those grievances, President of this commission, Billy Joe Kemp, initiated a letter to Mr. DuBois explaining that we were in receipt of, the commission were in receipt of those complaints, and further explaining that this matter would be set for hearing on Monday. And of course, at that time, Mr. DuBois continued to persist in his very unprofessional mode of casting racism and disrespect to one of the co-employees of mine who were employed with Billy Joe Kemp office. That person happens to be a black young lady.
I did not know Miss Bell was offended until he came in here this morning. And if Miss Bell was offended, I definitely apologize, because I think the world of her. She's an excellent employee.
That you have serious problems working with blacks.
Not so whatsoever. I spent last Friday morning, 3/4 of the day Friday, working with Miss Yvette Smiley Smith to acquire 5,000 more additional feet of space.
Got it.
Okay. And your best call.
There's a touch of Southern hospitality on Highway 167 going into Enterprise, and the person primarily responsible for the welcome sign being there is Risa Bird, finalist in WSFA TV's 1982 Jefferson Awards. Acquiring friendly billboards is just one of Mrs. Bird's accomplishments. The latest in her long list of civic activities is an anti-smoking campaign, which she has taken into area schools.
What would you think? This is the lung of a what? That's exactly right. That is the lung of a smoker. This is a normal, clean, healthy lung. Why do you think it's important to get to children with your message about smoking at an early age?
Well, I feel like that so many people, after they've started smoking, that it's hard to break the habit. And if we can reach the children and let them understand why it's bad for them so they never start, then they won't have to worry about stopping.
Do you think they take the message back home to their parents who might be smokers?
I'm sure they do, because I've had a lot. The first time we did it last year at this school, I had about 15 parents call me that night praising our program. They were so thrilled to see that we were doing something about it.
About 8,000 children have seen her presentation so far, and it's obvious that the message is getting through.
I think people who smoke they're terrible, because it will kill you.
In the truest spirit of community service, Risa Bird is making a difference in children's lives.
Well, you can do anything you want to do and anything you believe in that's worthwhile. I've always felt like that, that you only live one time, and that anything you can do to help your fellow man, that's what you should do, that the Lord put us all here for a purpose, and I feel like mine is to help my family and my fellow man.
When off-duty with the second-floor surgery unit at Flowers Hospital in Dothan, LPN Jean Parr can be found wearing quite a different type of uniform, that of the Air Force Reserves. As part of her duties with the Reserves, Ms. Parr implemented a free high blood pressure screening clinic for the public, and thousands have taken advantage of the service.
I tell you how it came about. I attended a hypertensive workshop in Montgomery 2 years ago, and there were speakers from all over. I believe it was the council, or there was a council, and it was strictly dealing with hypertension. And I thought that it would be a great thing for us to do with the Air Force Reserve, because we do go on recruiting drives with the people. It would be excellent for the medical people to get involved, because we do perform a community service. And as a result, I put this together, took it back, and got the approval from my chief nurse and the commanding officer, who gave their blessings. And my first one was done at Bel Air Mall in Mobile, and I did about 500 or 600, and because hypertension is our number one killer, and I felt that if we had one to come back and says, hey, look, I went to my doctor, my blood pressure was up, I'm now on medication, then I feel that the program is beneficial.
For her willingness to contribute her time and knowledge to others, Jean Parr has been selected as a finalist in the 1982 Jefferson Awards. God respects you when you work, but He loves you when you sing. Surely this could be the philosophy of Joe Reese Tisdale, Director of Choral Music in the Op City Schools.
Come again, sweet love and now invite, thy graces that refrain, to do thee delight.
From the moment you enter Tisdale's classroom, you feel something special between the students and teacher, perhaps because together they are accomplishing what none could do on his own.
You ever wonder if maybe the kids won't be up to it?
I will do a lot of wondering, Karen, especially like the night before, but they always come through. They never let you down. When it's actually curtain time, they're there and ready and up for it.
The efforts have paid off year after year. Football players are somehow transformed into dancers and shy sopranos into stars. The final productions play to 3 nights of packed houses.
Which is your greater love, the music or the kids?
It'd be hard to separate the two. I think it has to be the kids first of all, because if it were just music, there's so many other things you can do with music. But this way, it's you get to enjoy the best of both.
What's fun about your job?
Everything. Every day is different. I guess one of the unique things about my job is that some of these students I am with for 7 years, I get to watch them grow up. I have some of them as 6th graders, right on through the time they're seniors. And so consequently, I feel like by that time that they're mine, part mine. And to watch them grow and mature and develop. And then when we do things like the musicals and other productions and things, to see them deliver and produce things that they never thought they could.
Outside the classroom and rehearsals, Joe's influence is felt in the prayer groups he established, and he feels it's time that couldn't be better spent.
I think of them as the salt of the school. They are the leveling agent for the whole student body. I think their influence is felt throughout the school. I think Opp High School would not be as good a place if it were not for these students that are involved in this type of thing.
Americans have a right to a decent education. They have a right to be free from hunger. They have a right to have a decent place. Today, we have a federal program which is guaranteed to hurt more and more working people, to throw, instead of getting people back to work, it's throwing people out of work. Instead of doing something about the high cost of energy, we see energy rates going up. Instead of doing something about the problems of our cities, we see many of our cities in decay and are being ignored. We have the old story in America today of the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer. The Reagan budget is designed to transfer wealth. Steel companies start to buy into chemicals. And what happens? Eventually our plants decay, and Japan and Germany. Every American who wants to work should be able to find a job. But today we have policies which are guaranteed, at Charlotte, in the city of Charlotte, rather, is to talk about the economic problems of our times, particularly as they're impacting on working people. Right now we have over 10 million unemployed Americans. University of North Carolina at Charlotte, in the city of Charlotte, rather, is to talk about the economic problem. Companies start to buy into chemicals. And what happens? Eventually our plants decay, and Japan and Germany, patience, listening to some of the things I have to say. Yes. The Reagan budget is designed to transfer wealth out of the pockets of poor and working people and middle-income people and into the pockets of the rich. And all you have to do is see every analysis of the budget that's been conducted shows that the wealth is being transferred upward in this country. And poor people and working people and even middle-income people don't have a chance with this current budget. And I think that it's my responsibility, having been the mayor of one of the big cities in America, to go throughout the country and to talk about the economic problems and to suggest ways in which people will be able to get a government, again, they can call their own.
Most of the recovered goods, valued at $2.5 million, was sorted out on the tables waiting to be reclaimed. The coin dealers requested that their pictures not be taken for security measures. The coin dealers praised investigators for their speedy work in recovering the goods. 5 people were arrested and charged with first-degree robbery and grand theft. Dealer Lloyd Gibbs of Birmingham reclaimed about $30,000 to $35,000 worth of goods. Gibbs says he still plans to attend future coin shows, but only with police protection.
The only way I'll go is to have city policemen. This is on the circuit, and we will not go unless they do have city police officers, no guards.
In the meantime, police are still investigating the robbery. Today, investigators traveled to North Florida, where they say cases of goods are believed buried in that area. Police say they expect to arrest at least 3 more people in connection with the largest robbery in the history of Alabama. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News at the Montgomery Civic Center. Outside, a Montgomery police officer guarded the area. Inside, the $2.5 million worth of recovered coins, gold and silver, precious metals, and jewelry lay sorted out on tables waiting to be reclaimed. Most of the dealers did not want their pictures taken for security measures. All praised police investigators for arresting the suspects 48 hours after the robbery and recovering most of the stolen valuables. Coin dealer Lloyd Gibbs of Birmingham reclaimed about $30,000 to $35,000 worth of property. Gibbs says he still plans